now we're reaching millions. Millions we are reach. Reach and teach. Reach and teach. Reach and teach. Yeah. I pray the Lord let the light of His countenance can shine upon everyone on each.
I had a good job working with the government, benefits, a salary that cleared my bills with room to spare. The title sounded very impressive, and honestly, I was pretty good at my job. But there came a time when every morning I would sit at my desk and there was this ache. An ache, almost like you're wearing shoes that looked perfect but was just half size too small. And if you're a shoes lover like me, you would know what that feels like when the shoe look perfect but it doesn't fit. Everything looked fine, but nothing felt right after a while. And that was me being too comfortable in a place where God was calling me for more. It doesn't hurt enough to move, but it hurts enough to remind you that that's not it. Welcome to the Reaching Millions podcast with yours truly, Crystal Daye. I moved from paycheck to paycheck dreamer to becoming a millionaire motivator. And I'm here to share with you the real deal about what it means to walk in purpose, to build an empire based on the gifts and calling that God has given you. I have used writing, speaking, coaching, things that I'm passionate about to be able to impact lives all over the world. And today's episode is obedience as a price tag, the investment I made to walk in purpose. Dun, dun, dun. I'm super excited about this episode because I believe that there are many, many women and even men and leaders who have been feeling discomfort. They're feeling a level of discomfort where they're at right now, and they know that God is calling them for more. And in previous episode, I would have shared, about the shrinking syndrome and reasons why many of us are not reaching millions with our calling. And I do believe that this episode is exactly what you need so that you can walk in obedience to who God has called you to be. So let me paint a picture of what life was like before this crystal that people see. Because the truth is, obedience sounds spiritual until it costs you something. What I didn't know was that one decision would lead me to impact millions and will have a global brand. No, I worked in procurement, and for those who don't know, that is, I was responsible for sourcing, purchasing, and managing vendor relationships and contracts. It was a pretty detailed career, and it was one that I was very, very good at. And I wanted to know that I'm not here to tell you that your 9 to 5 is the enemy. As I've told many persons, and I've probably said it here on the podcast, that your 9 to 5 will fund your faith call or for your faith walk. But there comes a time where you know that there's a longing for more. Because here's the truth. I always love writing. I remember at age 9, my mom gave me a diary. I tell people I don't know if she saw the gift of writing or she was just trying to shut me up because I talk a little bit too much. But whatever the case, me starting to write from so young, it was just me sharing my thoughts. It wasn't, I never dreamed of becoming a author or anything like that. I always knew that one day I would get into politics because guess what? I knew that I was called to impact people. Whatever career it will, I would have pursued maybe law. I thought about becoming a lawyer, etc. I know that there was just more, and I wanted to pursue my potential to the fullest. Now, when you somewhere along, me being somebody that likes to write and just building the career that we were all taught, go to school, get a degree, get the job, buy the house, get the husband, and everything that comes along with that. So for me, writing was just like a nice outfit that I was just saving for a special occasion, but it wasn't anything that I was thinking to pursue. Plus, I always tell people I'm not a creative. I cannot write a poem to save my life, right? And it was just, yeah, just something that I would do for my own self reflection. That's the best way I could put it. But then there was this poll, and this poll that really just after a while, I felt this longing after I surrendered my life to Jesus that I should share the gospel or share my testimony. So I started to write on social media, and I eventually got into blogging, and I shared all of this on the first episode, so I won't jump into that. But then 2014 came. And here's the thing, purpose isn't always clear at first. And that's what I want many of us to know. Because when I was writing those blogs or when I was writing the social media posts, I wasn't thinking about this big dream of having any business. But here's the thing, there's a danger that comes with comfort. It doesn't make you, it challenges you to stay where you're at, and you think that that's where you are called to be. Now, as I mentioned, in 2014, while I was still in my 9 to 5 job, something shifted. And I started to speak, not on big stages, but in rooms and on platforms, some women's conferences, workshop for teen girls, churches. And to be honest with you, I didn't believe anybody was really watching. But I also knew that I started to impact people. So I was just being obedient with the things that were in my hand, one post at a time, one stage at a time. And that obedience wasn't glamorous, it was just consistent. And I didn't realize it was planting seeds for the crystal that is now where everybody sees. So I pause here to say that obedience always begins with small steps. Then in 2016, there was a breakthrough when I wrote my first book, Living a Royal Reality, and I want to take you inside of me writing that book. And maybe I would do an episode, about what I learned from writing my first book. But I want persons to know I was very, very busy in a full-time job, being a single mother, serving on many ministries in my church, and I had to find time to write. So I would write early morning, late nights, on lunch break, on weekends when I had the chance, right? And even though there were a lot of doubt that would plague me regarding what I was writing, I just was trying to be obedient because God told me that I should write a book. So when Living a Royal Reality came and I shared it with the first episode, it became a bestseller in 48 hours. No, I needed to understand that I wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't as popular as I am right now. I didn't have a massive platform. But I believe that that moment became a breakthrough moment because when I saw the numbers and I saw the impact that this book was making, I sat with a mixture of gratitude and also fear. Because I knew that the assignment that God has given me was real, and I couldn't have any excuse anymore about me not being good enough. So I decided to stop playing small and see where this could go. And then 2017 came. And if many of you will remember the story, that's when I made a decision to leave my 9 to 5 job. No, in leaving my job, honestly, you to, I don't want to underestimate what this would have cost me. I had a comfortable income. I just bought a new home. I just bought a new car. And again, I had the stability. And I have the title of being the senior procurement officer. And, my company was preparing to pay for me to go and do my master's. And I was actually already doing my MBA. So, again, I felt like I was pretty successful, and I was being called out of this place of comfort and certainty to this unknown place. And it reminds me of in the book of Genesis when Abraham had that call. No, I walked away from the job not because I had all the answers, but because my business, because I felt this calling on God and I knew this was exactly what He wanted me to do. So even though the day I put in my resignation, my hands were shaking. And I won't pretend. because the truth is obedience doesn't always feel like confidence. Actually, most of the time, it feels terrifying. It feels irrational. And I can tell you that if you're listening to this, there is a call for more. I don't think everybody's called to leave their 9 to 5 job, but if you're listening to this, there is a call that you are experiencing right now to obey God to do something. Maybe it's to write a book, maybe it's to launch a business, maybe it's to launch your speaking career. Maybe it's to finally do your coaching certification or some other certification, right? Whatever it is, there is a calling. And this is why you have to be willing to pay the price tag of obedience. Because I want to have the conversation that most people skip over in their testimonies. Because the testimonies are beautiful, but we often start at the breakthrough and forget the before. So for me, obedience is not free. Let me say it. Obedience to your calling is not free. And obedience requires faith. It requires faith. For me, I had to pay. And when I wrote this down, I was thinking, what are some of the things that I felt like I had to pay when it came on to the obedience to leave my 9 to 5 job and to pursue this calling. One, I paid insecurity because I didn't have a consistent salary. And I remember always sharing that, for a few months, I kept every month I would cry on the 25th of the month because when I looked in my bank account, there was no salary. The predictability ended. And there were months where entrepreneurship was really, really hard, and I had to really trust God to provide for me. Nobody tells you about this season, but it's real. And if you're in it right now, I need you to know that it's not a sign that you have made a mistake. It's a sign that your faith is being stretched to match the size of the obedience. Now, I want to tell you, I remember going to it was a life group or a cell group. And I started to doubt my calling because honestly, God told me to start this business, writing, speaking, coaching, and publishing. And I was struggling to make ends meet. When I look into my account, and I did have a few clients, but one I was significantly undercharging. So some days I couldn't even give my daughter lunch money or buy gas to pay in the car. So I was really doubtful. And I went to this cell group, and this gentleman, genius, I never forget, and he talked about believing in God and knowing God. And basically I left with the question, do I believe that God has called me to leave my job, or do I know that God has called me to leave my job? And the difference is you can believe something, but the truth is until it becomes a knowing, then there's some doubt. So if I believe my name is Crystal, then somebody may say, well, it actually is pronounced Crystal or Crystally or, but when I know this is my name, then there's no doubt about it. And I left that cell group no longer questioning if God had called me or if I'd made a mistake. And even though I wasn't seeing the result that I believe that God had promised me, I knew that I was in obedience to God. The second thing I paid in my identity, because the truth is I revel in knowing, at such a young age. I think I got the job when I was about 25, there about, or 24, 25, and, being in, level middle management at the time. So preparing now, 30, having my own home, having a car, the first person in my family to travel, etc. There was a good identity that I could revel in. And, I was making my parents proud. But when you step out of a familiar role, you are going to go through a grieving process. When you are excited about where you're going, it doesn't take away from you feeling like you are letting go of something. So I had to let go of the version of myself that was tied to the success that came in that season so that I could walk into this new season. And it wasn't popular then. I tell people in 2016, when you talk about Christian life coach, people actually mocked us and mocked me to say, oh, who is a Christian life coach, or, this author thing, how is that going to pay the bills, and who is going to pay to speak? Like I experienced it, but I had to be willing to walk in this new identity. The next thing, I had to pay it in relationship, because not everyone celebrated me leaving my 9 to 5 job. Honestly, some persons like my father, and I remember just he loved the idea of me having a stable career, doing a master's, etc. Right? So when I walked away from it, it was very confusing, not just to my father, but to many, many people. And I just knew I had to hold on to what I believe that God said. And it doesn't mean that because everyone isn't cheering you on your new journey, it doesn't mean that God has not called you. You are gonna have to walk some of the seasons alone. And then the final one that I wrote down is what, and a coach of mine, Darnell J. Arman, she always talk about the messy middle. Had to pay to stay in the messy middle. So this is the gap between me leaving the job and building the empire. It's a middle season that no one really wants to put on Instagram. It's the uncertainty, the second guessing of your calling, the days when you wonder if you had heard God right, or if all the posting you're posting is even making sense. And here's what I want you to know about in between. It's not a wasted time. This is where you are forming, yeah, right? Because God didn't take the people of Israel from Egypt directly to the promised land. He took them through the wilderness because he needed them to release the identity of who they were as slaves in that season. So the messy middle is where we are forming our new identity. As I mentioned, we are forming new mindset. We are going after new success and accomplishments. No, it wasn't all doom and gloom. And this is why I titled the podcast, not just the obedience as a price tag, but the subtitle is the investment I made to walk into purpose, and the investment that you are going to have to make. Because despite you paying your comfort, despite you paying, the predictability of, the certainty of what you already know, dealing with the approval of others, etc. The truth is that obedience may cost you comfort, but it unlocks your calling. And every new level of impact will start with a yes from God. And I say, I did a preached a sermon many years ago, I believe, at Berean Church of God, and we talk about obedience being an investment, because we always hear the preachers talk about obedience cost you something, and obedience cost. And as a business major, and I worked in accounts for many years, when you think about assets versus liability, and you think about cost versus investment, or expenses versus investment, you know that you are losing something. When you focus on just the cost of something, when you focus on just the price tag, you know that you're losing. But when you think about investment, when you pay a price tag, you know that the results that will come from that is greater. And that is the power of obedience that I want people to leave with from this. Because on the other side of that, yes, right? Because I don't want you to leave, thinking that the price tag is, again, just this expense is actually an investment. Because no, as a 13-time published author, right? Woman who once believed, because I didn't think that my writing was, but it was enough that for God to use to be able to impact thousands of persons that have been able to read my book, find my voice, right? And I don't want you to dismiss what God has placed in you, because it is that He would use to multiply. I've been able to speak on stages all over the world. Just when this episode is coming out, I'm just coming from Portland, Oregon, right, at a conference. I am actually going to another event in Vegas this year. And so far, I've spoken in Canada, in St. Lucia, Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados. And this is not even including the virtual platforms that I've been able to speak on. So I've been able to impact lives all over the world. And I didn't have these connections on my own. God opened these doors. And that's not me being spiritual or, like saying, oh, to God be the glory as some like humility trick. But really and truly, I can tell you that it was my obedience to God that have helped me to build this brand. I've been featured on hundreds of media, television, radio, podcast, magazine. And every time I think about the girl blogging in obscurity in 2014, I want to go back and tell her, girl, you better keep going. You better keep posting. You better keep showing up because your faithfulness in private is building your platform in public. Somebody hashtag that. Yes, for somebody that's listening to this, I want you to know your faithfulness in private is going to help you to build the platform that God has called you to build in public. I've been able to help thousands and thousands of people to write and publish their books, launch their speaking career, build their coaching business. And, it's such a blessing when people come and say, I have a book inside me, I don't know how to get it out. And I can say, yes, I am the person to help you to unlock that. Now, I can tell you again that obedience brings multiplication. My yes, and even though sometimes I may say my one yes to leaving my 9 to 5 job, the truth is it was a one yes. It was multiple of yeses. Yes to write the blog when I didn't feel like I was a good writer. Yes to keep posting when people kept telling me that, oh, you write too much or your posts are too long. Yes to the first speaking engagement, even though I was shaking in my boots. Yes to the television interview when I'm like, oh my God, I'm not good enough to go on TV. Like the multiple yeses created the, I'm going to say, the courage to say yes when the big call to leave my 9 to 5 job came. And your obedience is not just for you. Your obedience is actually bigger than you. And yes, no, I built $1 million business. And I am not saying this to impress you. I'm saying to impress upon you that when God is the foundation, excellence become sustainable and inevitable. Let me say that again. When God is the foundation, excellence become sustainable and inevitable. The assignment that God has called you to must be completed, but it will come from you willing to pay the price tag of obedience. So I want to ask you, what is one thing that you have been putting off? Not because you don't know what it is, because most of the time you know the book, the business, the message, the platform, the ministry, the pivot, the phone call you need to make, the resignation letter you need to write, or just the pitch that you need to make, the post that you need to make, whatever it is. How are you allowing comfort to quietly kill your calling? No, I want to leave with you 3 lessons that came from when I was writing these 3 lessons. You know me, I'm very practical. One, delayed obedience is still disobedience. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. And it breaks my heart as a book coach when I hear women, they would start like my book coaching program and they would start confidently telling me this is what God wants them to do. And then the challenges come and all of a sudden, years pass and they can't finish. And they think it's noble. And actually, it breaks my heart because most of the time they're still in church and raising their hands and saying, Lord, I surrender, when they haven't even answered or they haven't been brave enough to fulfill the call that God has already given them. 2, you don't need clarity, you need conviction. And I always say clarity comes through action because the truth is, I didn't see this big business. I didn't see all of these things. before. Eventually, I started to, sit down and envision, and the more I got exposure to, what the online platform is and the possibility that existed for me as a coach, as a publisher, etc. Right? But it didn't start like that. So I just had the conviction that I wanted to help somebody. And then three, your calling will feel bigger than your current reality. And, I always think back to my first book, Living a Royal Reality. If you have not gotten a copy of that book, you need to, because Living a Royal Reality talks about you not focusing on your current reality. Your current reality is that you don't have enough money. The current reality is that you are just a secretary. The current reality is that you are not the greatest writer. The current reality is that you only have 200 followers. But that's not who you are. That is just where you're at right now. But what God has called you to do, or who is calling you to be, will always pull you out of that comfort zone. It will always challenge what you currently know. So I don't want to underplay how fearful that this step of obedience can feel. But, when we were growing up, there was this song that we'd always sing, with Christ in the vessel, we can smile at the storm. Most of us have not been smiling for a very long time. But I can tell you that with Christ as your foundation, if He is your foundation, you will always be able to build greater than you can expect. So I wrap up this episode that I pray that will bless you, to say that obedience is not a leap into darkness. It's a walk into the light you can already see, the light in your heart. Because when I started blogging, that was a light. When I wrote my first book, that was a light. When I spoke on the first stage, that was a light. When I left my job, that was a light. And truly, I was just following the breadcrumbs that my obedience was laying out. You don't need a whole staircase. You just need a next step. Now, I would say if your next step is to write a book, I want to help you to do that. This is literally part of the biggest assignment that I've been given. So I don't want you to listen to this podcast and not schedule a call with me so that we can discuss whether you just have the idea. You don't have to have the book. You don't have to have the title. You don't have to have nothing on paper. You just need to have the idea. And I will be able to pull it out of you like the midwife. Or maybe you've written a book and you're like, I don't know if it's good enough, but I want to get it published. Definitely you can hire us at Daylight Publishers to do that. Or maybe you're a published author already. And if you're a published author, listen, I am super excited to help you to monetize that message, how to use that message to turn into multiple streams of income, how to use your message to launch your speaking career, and or to become a life coach, become a coach that is able to impact others. So I'm going to leave my contacts in the description where you can schedule a call with me. If you're not following me on Instagram, please, that's my favorite platform for you to follow me. Go to Crystal SDAYE. Follow me on Instagram. Please leave a review on Apple or Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're listening to it, because I really believe that this episode is going to be a game changer for many, many women and leaders that are listening. Also, I ask you to share this episode with somebody who is sitting on their calling and maybe feel afraid. They need to hear this, right? So come find me, come into my world, whether it's a book, speaking platform, coaching program. Let's figure out your next step together, how your obedience will be the thing that unlocks your blessing, that unlocks your legacy, that unlocks the impact and income, so that you too can reach millions with your message. God bless you. God bless you.
Reach and teach, reach and teach, reach and teach. Yeah. So now we're reaching millions, millions we are reach and teach, reach and teach, reach and teach. Yeah. I pray the Lord that the light of His countenance countenance can shine up on everyone on each.